Well, my name is Eleanor Hancock. I'm the director of White Awake. We're really pleased to offer this training with Lyla June and to have you all connect with her and also bring some resources into the work that she's doing, that she and some of her colleagues are doing. I am going to pass this over to Joe Delamore for just a moment to orient you to Zoom so that we can hopefully have as smooth an experience as possible with the technology, and then we'll just quickly pass it back to Lyla.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. Hi, everybody. This is the Zoom platform. I think most of you were with us last week, but I'm just gonna do a quick rundown, and I put some notes in the side on the chat if you want to see them. We're basically just gonna tell you how to mute and unmute yourself. Down in the bottom left-hand corner, if you're on a computer screen, you should see a little microphone that says mute. You can click on that to mute and unmute yourself. We ask you to stay muted during any time when somebody's speaking to the whole group so that we can minimize background noise. But if Lyla asks for people to ask questions or pitch in later, you can unmute yourself at that time. Next to that is a little video camera. You can click on that to either stop or start your video. If you go along the bottom panel there's a little speech bubble that says chat. That opens up a side panel where you can see chat. We're going to keep that mostly closed down, I think, during the presentations. Lyla might have a moment where she wants to open it up at some point. And then in the top right-hand corner, there's a little Rubik's Cube looking thing there, and you can click on that to go to gallery view or speaker view. Speaker view is when you just see the person speaking, like in a big way on your screen, so you can track who's speaking, and gallery view is where you see all the little squares of video. So that's up to you, but if you want to track who's speaking, sometimes it's easier to go onto speaker view. All right, that's all I've got for you. That's all yours, Lyla. Or
yeah.
Oh, I forgot the phone thing.
Yeah, real quick, folks on the phone, if there's if you're in a breakout room or there's an opportunity for people to speak into the whole group, you unmute yourself by pushing *6. So folks on the phone, if you need to unmute yourself, push *6.
Thanks, Eleanor.
All right,
Awesome.
Lyla.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for being here. Yat shik aro shidne she nanisht ejitachini nishlidon haskaitne bashishin ashi hedishe bilgana edishanel akwit ego dene as aninishling. I know that a lot of you were on last weekend and we were talking about a lot of just cultural protocols and ways in which you can sort of not do any cultural faux pas. And we talked about our mantra, which was, in what way, if at all, can I help? And approaching communities with that spirit of in what way, if at all, can I help? And when we think about helping Indigenous communities, really starting out with that question, so that they can lead the ways in which we help Indigenous communities. And we went over some examples of what Native people are doing today, really incredible work, ingenious work, and ways in which we can weave into that. We also went over some of the resources that we have to offer very briefly, and ways that we could contribute to Indigenous communities. And we ended I ended just by thanking all of you for caring enough to take this training to learn how to come into these communities in a good way, and for being open to that. So before we begin, I have this really special treat for you guys today. I have 5 panelists. They're mostly just all my friends from different circles. They're from all around the country, but they're 5 Indigenous community members who are coming on today to basically give their perspective, because I think that one thing that I think is true is that no community is the same, and what Lyla thinks is not necessarily the be all end all, and it's not necessarily going to capture going to capture the breadth of perspectives that exist. And so that's really exciting. I'm really happy that they're here. I'll introduce them in a little bit. Thanks guys for navigating the crazy tech world to be here. So before we start though, last time we did this training, apparently the chats were a little bit distracting for some people, and it was really hard for them to focus on the training because the chat bubble kept coming up. So some people requested that we turn the chat off this training. I thought that would be okay because we left the chat on for the first one, people who do want it, and then for people who don't want it, we can leave it off for this one. But I wanted to pitch that to the group. Would that be okay with everyone? And if not, would you let us know? Okay, great. Thank you for doing that this time. We're gonna keep the chat off, and then we did create a Facebook group. Eleanor, with her wonderful administrative help, has created a Facebook group, which is really, really nice of her. She's put in a lot of incredible volunteer hours for this. I am going to be updating the Google Doc that we all have and that we're all sharing as we go along, maybe taking some notes of some of the presenters. Unless otherwise noted, I think the presenters are just going to remain anonymous, so I'm not going to use their names in the Google Doc. So anyways, I wanted to start out with their perspectives. We have Tanea Winder, who's Duckwater, Shoshone, Paiute, and Southern Ute. She's a good friend of mine. She's on the Dream Warriors musical group with me. She also went to Stanford. That's where I first met her. She was my RA. She's a wonderful person. We also have Carlisha Begay, who is a really precious soul from Dene territory. And she's been doing community work for youth ever since I've known her. She's a really talented YouTuber, and she's a believer in our culture, and she's a believer in our elders. So I'm really curious to know what her perspective is. We have Eric Nephew, who is also from Dene territory. He's originally from Bloomfield, and he's experienced a lot of different situations of racism and the absence of racism. And he just has a really beautiful, incredibly heartfelt perspective. I think just when it relates to the cross-cultural discussion, and I just really love the way he thinks about things. So he's on this panel. We have Paul Winnell. I hope I said your last name right, Paul. I know him as Tall Paul because he's a musician as well, and he's Anishinaabe from Minneapolis. And then hopefully we'll have Celestine, and Paul is brilliant. He's a really wonderful brother of mine, and he's done a lot of incredible work. He's an MC, so he does pop, and he's currently working on an album to uplift Anishinaabe culture and sort of get it out there more. Really brilliant guy, and really incredible story of hardship and overcoming hardship. And then we have hopefully Celestino Crowhill, who's a really good friend of mine, who's Apache, and we'll be giving some perspective. So Tanea, if it's okay with you, I want to start with you, and I have a pretty simple question. It's not like super complicated or anything, but just maybe give your 2 cents, your opinion from your heart, from your experience as an Indigenous woman. What do you think is the most important thing that European Americans can do to support Indigenous communities, to be in solidarity with Indigenous communities, etc.? And then Paul, I'll have you go next if that's okay. Hey, Tanea, we can't hear you for some reason. I'm not sure why. Oh, there you are. Yep, gotcha.
Okay, well, I had to switch to my phone because my laptop's weird. So, Mike, new Nania Tanea Winder, new Nania Chamot Wachich Mamach. My name's Tanea. I introduced myself in Ute. It's one of the tribes that I am. I said my Indian name is Winterbird Woman. It means during the winter when all of the other birds leave that the winterbird stays to continue bringing song and healing to the people. And so my main job is I've been running an Upward Bound program with Native youth for almost 10 years now. And before that, I was working with youth for 3 years. So I have over like 10 years worth of experience. But just in my time, I've just noticed different things. You know, I think the main thing is like funding and resources. For instance, I'm a recipient of the Gates Millennium Scholarship. And so Bill Gates just giving that money for me to school just really helped me not worry because I got to go to Stanford and I didn't have to like work. And it just alleviated a lot of stress. And my job is to help Native youth from the different reservations I serve get into college. And they just have one of the main struggles is finances. And so I think if there's a scholarship, an Indigenous scholarship you could donate to, or if you wanted to come up like as your alliance, if you wanted to come up with a scholarship and there's like 3 different main scholarship providers for Native Americans. So the American Indian College Fund, which is based out of Denver, Colorado, the American Indian Graduate Resource Center, which is based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the Cobell Scholarship, which is also based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Me and my team of artists started a small scholarship for Native artists. If anyone wanted to donate to that, it's administered by the Cobell Scholarship, and so it is tax deductible. But that's one of the ways is to help, I think, like one student immediately, because one student, I think the odds are like it takes one Native American high school student out of like 3,000 or something. I can find the like study for the notes, but to make it to college and graduate with a bachelor's. And I know that can sound like a sad fact, but it's also just to flip it and think about how powerful that one student is. I know it decreases even for masters, like 1 in 7,500. And so really investing in somebody like that can not only help that person, but help their community. And then I would say a lot of the schools I work with are just completely under-resourced as well. So if there's a school on a reservation you would want to reach out to, see if they, I don't know, need books or need like Chromebooks for their school, stuff like that. If like giving money is like philanthropy is anybody's like thing that they would want to do. Because I think it's hard when people want to give money, but then just like tell you what you have to do with it. I don't think that's true philanthropy in terms of helping. But for people who want to do like acts of service, I would say for me, I'm working at a predominantly white institution. I work at CU Boulder. I just wish that more people in the room would even just say like, well, what about the Indigenous students? Or what about, and like students of color, and seeing how they're served, like what can we do for them on campus? Because it's hard being like the only person saying those things in all the meetings, and then everybody, at least in my experience, it's like, well, of course she's saying that because she's Native. But it's so powerful to find allies. Like on my university, we were able to get a wall for a permanent Indigenous mural, and it only happened because of white allies who are like, well, one guy was a building proctor, he's like, I'll donate the walls, and then another one is like, I'll donate paint, like, and now we have like the first ever permanent mural. And so it was able to help a local artist with the income, students got to come help with the painting, like it just really helped so much. So for me, I think it's just like speaking up and like using privilege to help create space for like dialogue that needs to happen. And that can happen in like lots of different ways too, whether it's if you're in a state that has like a lot of Native tribes, like writing to your legislation, and I'm trying to do this at my university so I can share templates too, but to see if Natives could get in-state tuition, like if it doesn't matter what tribe they come from. So that's something we're trying to work on at CU Boulder, is to try to get in-state tuition for all Native tribes. I know Colorado State University does it. So those are, I think, just because my main experience is working in education, those are things that I think would be most helpful for me in terms of how allies could help support Indigenous communities.
Thank you, sis. I really appreciate your perspective.
Oh, I think you're muted.
That's why you're my bestie, you know? You always got my back. Okay, so, you know, thank you, sis, for your perspective. I didn't know that statistic. one in 3,000 Native students will get a bachelor's, 1 in 7,500 will get a master's. Even if
Yeah,
those aren't like, yeah.
It's from that Dr. Cody Brayboy. I can find the actual statistic though and share it with
Yeah.
you. Share with
Yeah,
everyone
that'd be
later.
great, because after these trainings, we give everyone a document with links and stuff. But yeah, even if those aren't precise statistics, the fact that it's in the thousands was completely mind-blowing to me. And I think that would make a lot of Native students feel better to know that there's not anything quote unquote wrong with them for not being able to graduate. There's just so much to overcome, and the system is built against them. So I personally am not like really enamored with Western education, but I can't deny that it has helped me. I don't like it. I think it's really colonial, and yet I can't deny that it has really helped me, you know, have different platforms. So next we're gonna go to Paul. And feel free to introduce yourself, brother. And, you know, Tanea has a very education-based answer, but to all the panelists, like, do not feel pressured to, you know, each of you have your own unique perspective, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. And each of you have an expertise in your specific life experience. So please just say whatever's on your heart and whatever's on your mind, and just know that that's exactly the right answer. So Paul, go ahead and let us know, what do you think is the most important thing that European Americans can do to support Indigenous communities?
Hello. Paul Indigenous Kaz Jaganashi Mungadush, Gukabi Kong and Dunjaba, Minawa, Gazaga Squad, Jamaica, Nimbin to get beat you guys. Hello, my name is Paul. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm enrolled in the Leash Lake Band of Ojibwe. And what came to my mind as I was thinking of this question is really just to check your privilege in your own life and how you might be using it without even knowing it sometimes, maybe. I feel like anybody who's here must have a good heart and mind to try to be a better ally. And this is on my mind because of like the media, like how they're trying to make these Covington Catholic high school boys look like victims of a situation. And you find all these background images of them in blackface trying to call it school spirit when their school colors are blue and white. Or, you know, even personal situations like in my own life, my girlfriend working for his company, who is obviously, this company's ran by white people who do not pay her what she deserves to be paid, even though she works harder than her coworkers, who are often mostly white. She saved this company millions of dollars, and when she asked for a raise after working overtime every day for months on end and working at home after work, being stressed out, you know, they just ignore her and start trying to solve the situation by divvying out her duties to other coworkers, who then fail to do those duties, so she has to take them back on at the same pay rate when these people are making salary hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You know, she's just silenced and disempowered in her workplace. So you know, if any of y'all are employers, you know, maybe think about that. You know, do you have people of color working for you that you may be unconsciously treating unfairly? And that's just a really specific situation. But I think really what I'm getting at is, how might you be using white privilege to benefit yourself, or even maybe subconsciously hurt others? And that's really the thing that's on my mind a lot right now.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks for that specific example of your girlfriend and what she's going through. I think those stories really help us ground our practice in reality and help us understand the issue on a much more personal level. And just thanks for your work in general. If you want to check out Paul's music, it's Tall Paul, and he's a really incredible musician that I have the honor of touring with here and there. I think if it's okay, Carlicia, we'll go to you, and then we'll do Eric, and then we'll do Celestino, if that's okay. And like I said, sis, just whatever's on mind is the right answer. So I'm really, really grateful that you're here today too, because you have a very unique perspective, I think, of being like, you know, non-urban Indigenous woman who really grew up in the rural areas of our people's territory and really had a really close connection to our elders and to our language and to everything. And so yeah, just whatever you think, go for it, sister.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Carlicia, and I'm actually sitting here with my grandma listening in on the conversation, and I'm trying my best to translate as much of like the topic and the discussion to her, and we're like just kind of exchanging different ideas as far as the topic. And so for me personally, I do not necessarily know too much about I don't know how to go about this. I recently actually started learning things about like allies and especially like Indigenous peoples, like our lives and stuff. I just kind of always assumed that it was like within my home and my family and on our reservation. And it wasn't until like a year ago, I think, that I started being introduced to friends like Lyla and a few other people who were able to invite me to different events where I was informed of a whole lot of different amazing things that I was able to learn and also bring home to my grandma's house. And like I said, I was just sitting here with my masane listening in on the conversation. And a lot of the times I do listen in on the conversation, and I like come home and I share it with my family. And a lot of the times I'm sharing it mostly with a bunch of my elders, because my masane and my nali are both, my grandmothers are both very social, and they're like social butterflies. So a lot of the times I'm sitting there creating conversation amongst the elders in our community. So in my perspective, I think that the way you would be able to help is to be informative, like and also providing resources, finances, like all of that. I totally agree with that, because out here on the res, on the Navajo res, I live near an area called Chinle, and a lot of the times we are not aware, or the community is not very much aware of what is happening out there as far as conflict, I guess. And I feel like the more informative people are, the more resources that are brought to the communities, and the more outlets we're able to be assisted with, I think it would benefit the community a lot, just because there's not everybody has the technology and the finances to go out and travel and to see all this stuff. And then also just being able to come to the communities and make people aware of like the different ways of navigating through these struggles, I guess. I don't know. I'm really nervous. I'm so sorry.
It's all good, sis. No worries. So what I'm hearing you say is like to help inform Indigenous communities would be helpful to you, because not everyone has the resources or even the technology or the support that they need to travel out and to really gain understanding of the different problems going on in not only in our community but nationally, so because when we understand what's going on nationally, that affects our communities. So would you say that what you're saying is like it would be helpful for European Americans to kind of weave information webs to the communities to help inform them of sort of larger picture things that are going on?
Yeah, I would think so. Just because a lot of the topic that was discussed already, I was kind of like translating it to my masane, and she was like, "What? I have not heard of that," or "I did not know that." And a lot of the times, that's kind of the way she questioned a lot of the topic, is the reaction and the response that I would get from just anyone in the community.
Yeah. I think the fact that we are isolated, or that some rural reservations are isolated, is a very real thing, and I sometimes forget that because I just could never stay put. I just always wanted to like travel, and these days I'm going to a new city every week, and so I'm traveling a lot, and sometimes I lose touch with the fact that that's not common as an Indigenous person, and I remember you and I, Carlicia, we went to South Dakota for the Black Hills Unity concert, and that was a big trip for a lot of us. I took a van full of our homies up there, and it blew our world open a little bit, right? It was like, wow, this is what's going on with the Lakota Nation, and this is different issues affecting. So what would you think is like a responsible and careful way that a European American could come into the communities and start informing? Or I don't know, have you thought about that?
Not too much. I mean, I would think like organizing, how we kind of were invited to the Black Hills and then we kind of gathered and we went there. I feel like if they were to reach out to the communities out, like rural communities, and learn a little bit about it, and then upon like an invitation or something to go out
Mm-hmm.
and
yeah, and that's one thing I would say to everyone on the call. One thing that I found have been very transformative for Indigenous youth is service learning trips or educational trips, because a lot of youth on the reservation, they might not ever travel internationally. I think some of us on the call might take it for granted that we've been outside the country. A lot of Indigenous youth never will, and so I think that's one way that could be really creative for us as, European Americans. I include myself in that because I am part European. That really, really well thought out and really done with a lot of integrity. Service learning trips where you could take a group of 5 Native youth or 10 Native youth to see a certain part of the country, or to see a different Native community, or both, or even internationally, to see what other Indigenous peoples are experiencing on the other side of the globe. I know that a lot of youth from Taos Pueblo went to Alaska to see what the Native people are going through over there, and it was really eye-opening for them to see, like, wow, colonization isn't just about us, it's happening everywhere. You'd be surprised how many youth don't ever get that opportunity. So thanks for your perspective, sis. It's actually really, really, really valuable. And I think you bring something that no one else can bring. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, that's all.
Okay, aro nsago shimasane. Tell your grandma we say thanks for joining.
Grandma, shada isn't on games. Isn't on games.
Oh, eh.
Maybe ask your grandma the same question and we'll come back to her because we have mostly youth on this panel. It'd be good to get an elder's voice. Okay. And then we have Eric Nephew from Bloomfield, New Mexico, who also has a very unique perspective. And just the same question to you, Eric. No worries about sounding like the other panelists. Just whatever's in your heart is the right answer. But what do you think is one of the important ways that European Americans could be better allies to native people?
Okay, can you guys hear me? All right.
Yep, we can hear you.
I just wanted to start off by saying Yat'e, Chick Ado, Shidine, Eric Nephew, Yanishe, Da'etinen, Onagani, Bashichin, Bet Ani Dashiche, Talk, Hani Dashinale. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about it made me think about the land. And I feel like through education, through a little bit of education, I feel like the people can be better allies by just getting to know what land it is that they're standing on, to learn more about the land and who is indigenous to the land, because I strongly believe wherever it is that anybody is coming from, it was very sacred to someone at that point.
Could you hold the microphone closer to your mouth a little bit? It might be a little easier.
Yeah. Is that better? Okay.
That's good.
But I feel like they could be better allies just by knowing what land it is that they're coming from, what land it is that they're standing on, because it was very sacred to someone at some point. And I feel like what brought me to this thinking about the land actually is thinking about my experience in the oil field. Actually, I was working in the oil field for a couple of years, and it's not something that I wanted to do for a long time. It was just something to do to help me get through school and pay for the bills and things like that. But working in the oil field actually gave me this whole unique perspective, because I would say 9 times out of 10, when we're out working in the oil field, we're working on just sacred land. I remember working out in southern Colorado in Ute territory and just seeing flags, these red flags tied up everywhere. And I was wondering exactly what those were. And actually, a lot of those red flags are markings of artifacts. Before any drilling site can go out and start drilling on a piece of land, they have a team go out there and actually survey the land and see if there's any sacred and indigenous artifacts laying around. And a lot of times, there are. So I think that that's what helped me helped bring me to that realization. Was that just through education, getting educated about what land it is that you're standing on. I feel like that's a good way to honor the indigenous people, and at the same time become better allies, just by knowing who it's sacred to.
Thank you so much, Eric. And speaking of which, Tanea just sent me a link. I've heard of this before, but It's basically, you can type in your zip code and it will tell you whose indigenous territory you're on. So thanks, Eric, for talking about that. And I know that Dene people, we are sitting on some of the largest coal deposits, oil deposits, uranium deposits. So for that reason, a lot of Dene people are they need to work at these industries because there's no other job available, and they've taken all of our sheep away, and they've taken all of our ways to survive without a wage economy. So we're forced to join a wage economy, and the only ones we can do is usually franchises or oil and gas. So I think another note there, and I know Bianca and Marielle are on this call, who are our white allies and accomplices, who are working very hard to stop coal production and oil production in our territories. And so I think, yes, having an understanding of whose land you're on, and also really fighting hard so that, Native people aren't even in a position where they are economically held hostage. And sometimes the best option they have is to become agents in the destruction of their own sacred lands. And it hurts us, because we're self-identified as protectors of our land. And so when we engage in the enterprise of destroying our own land, literally because there's no other economic option available that's viable, that really hurts our spirit and it hurts our souls. So obviously, maybe that's a no-brainer, but working hard to stop resource extraction from Indigenous communities and create economic alternatives in our communities, so that we don't have to work at these places. I know a lot of our family members, one of my uncles just had his lungs replaced because he was a coal miner. A lot of people in my family have worked in coal and oil and gas, and it's just a very strange feeling as a Dene person to be an active participant in the destruction of your own mother, of your own sacred sites, because there's no other options. We mined the uranium for the Cold War with our bare hands. That's not an exaggeration. That's truly what we did. And a lot of our elders have cancer now because we were part of the Cold War uranium extraction, and we even mined it from our own sacred mountain, sold, Mount Taylor. And so the heartbreak that goes along with that is unfathomable. And now most of the folks who did that are dead now from cancer. So obviously, maybe it's a no-brainer, but work very hard to educate your community about resource extraction, because oftentimes it's going on the homelands of people of color. But next, I think Celestino is on. Thanks so much for joining us, Celestino. Just whatever you want to share is great. Just how do you think, from your perspective, European Americans can be better allies to Indigenous peoples? All right, your
Hello?
mic. Oh, there you are. All right, cool. We hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, now I can't. I could before. Try again?
You can hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, man.
Nope, I hear you.
What's
Go
that?
ahead. Just go for it. I think we got you. Just go
Yeah,
for
I
it.
think this my internet connection is pretty weird. Hi, my name is Celestino Crow. I'm Apache, Rahumada, Two-Spirit. The first thing that came to my mind was something that happened to me at Standing Rock. Oh, and I just want to say I empathize with your story, Paul, and all my other brothers and sisters. Thank you for sharing. I know sometimes it's really hard for us to come to these tables over and over again and just feel like, nothing ever happens, and then continue on, doing our grind and doing what we're doing. So I appreciate you guys here with me and listening to me right now. So yeah, one of the first things that came to my mind was a situation at Standing Rock. And if it's, for those of you that are not sure what Standing Rock was, it's basically, oh man, it's basically a beautiful prophecy coming to fruition. But it's, again, drilling for oil, or it's a tar sands pipeline from Canada all the way to the East Coast, passing through the Standing Rock Reservation and drilling underneath specifically the Missouri River, which there was a huge resistance against that. But anyways, the first thing came to my mind was there was one day where we went out to an action. We actually went to the town where they had the oil workers. And, we were just doing a simple demonstration. And actually what it was a prayer to bring the four nations together. So in many cross-cultural practices, we have the medicine wheel, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. But in my practice, in my culture, what it means is four great nations. So that we have the white hoop, the red hoop, the black hoop, and the yellow hoop. So that day, particular day, we were visually creating this medicine wheel. And there was a worker who came and went in an oil truck, or his huge diesel truck, and ran over one of our Two-Spirit elders, which didn't make the news. And then he also proceeded to shoot at us with bullets. That didn't make the news. What was very significant about the number of those bullets was there were 7 bullets, which there's 7 great nations of the Lakota nations, which is where we were defending. And so afterwards, it was actually not that chaotic. Everything kind of wrapped up pretty nice. But I wanted to place you guys there specifically because when I got back into my vehicle, there was, I'm just assuming she was European, a European descent woman asked me, I'm so sorry, what can I do? What can I do? And, something, when Creator speaks through you, it's not really you, because I never had this epiphany. I never had this thought. And I said, you all had seeds, songs, ceremonies, and prayers, and land also. And you're not that different from us. The only difference is that we've continued our traditions through our lineage and through prayer and through resistance. And that's something that I feel like because there's a reason that you're on here. There's a reason that you're listening to Lyla, and I feel like it's economical. That's important. That's definitely important. But also what's important is your spiritual attraction to help Native people and to understand that there's something there for you. And, let's just tackle like the hard stuff. Like, say you're in an Indigenous, you're practicing Indigenous ways, or you receive prayer blessings from Indigenous people. I feel like that's okay, but there's a difference between receiving prayer and being a knowledge keeper, and sometimes it's better left up to someone who walks in that world and walks in that way and is seen in that way. And so therefore, when we ask our White Hoop Nation to reclaim their prayers and their songs, then, you can petition your government, and your government is the one that is doing all these atrocious things to the land and to the people. And so that's one of the ways that I feel, can also be, and it's challenging. I'm not going to say it's not challenging. It's very challenging, but I feel like the reclamation of your history is also key, very spiritual key. It's your essence, it's your roots. A tree cannot live without its roots, and those are your roots. And so when we don't have our roots, we go to other things and we take things from other people. And that's what I feel is happening. And so, and then also, support the arts. The arts is actually how our cultures has survived, through sculpture, textiles, songs, prayers, So yeah, I didn't want to talk forever, but that was the main thing that I feel very passionate about. And I feel like that was something that Creator was telling me and also telling that woman in that moment. Takayase.
All good, talk forever. That's what we brought you on to do, is to speak your mind and speak your heart. Could you talk a little bit more about the arts and why that's important to support?
Yeah, the art saves lives, art saves cultures, and supporting the arts would be supporting local artists in your area that have a specific, if they're Indigenous artists, because even though we don't really agree with this monetary thing that we have to do, it's a part of our life, and it helps. And so, yeah, your contributions to support the arts, either giving to philanthropy, a foundation that supports the arts, or starting your own philanthropy organization that specifically supports the arts, is just incredible. I've had so many blessings of people supporting the arts and supporting my art. So I'm an artist. I know that Tanaya is an artist. I know that Paul's an artist. Lyla's an artist. I feel like that's not a coincidence. It can be a vehicle for change, a vehicle for Creator, and all these healings and blessings. And so I've just, it's what I'm going to do with my life. I'm studying art and ecology at the University of New Mexico, and we're going to change the world with that perspective, art and ecology. So thank you very much for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tino. That really means a lot. Thank you so much. Okay, so I know Carlisha had to jump off. I think Tanea, Paul, and Eric, and Tino are still on. I just want you all to know that if there's something you didn't get to say that came up for you, just feel free to interrupt right now or any time that I'm talking. Like, if there's something you didn't get to say, feel free to chime back in. We don't have time for like a whole lot of questions, but I think we do have maybe 10 or 15-ish minutes. So I actually wanted to open it up to folks. And Joe, I'm sorry, I'm throwing a curveball at you with the support, but maybe if any of the panelists need to drop off, if you got stuff to do today, go for it. Anyone who wants to stay on and maybe field some questions, feel free to stay on. But yeah, Joe, maybe you could turn the chat on just for a bit, or maybe people raise their hands. I don't know how it works. Or I think you can also just unmute yourself and ask a question. Whatever is, Joe, what would you recommend?
So let's have people unmute yourself if you want to share a question into the group verbally, or put something in the chat. I just opened it up so anybody can put something in the chat, and we'll just have kind of popcorn style, like somebody can just
Yeah.
Is that okay?
And people who are muted on the phone, press star what?
Star 6 if you're on the telephone.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go ahead and open it up.
Great.
I would like to ask a question. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you. You're good.
Okay. Thank you so much for holding this, and I really, really appreciate the spirit of holding it and everything you're saying and bringing everybody on who's speaking here. Thank you so much. I think my question is kind of about artists. It's kind of a personal question. I'm a musician and also work with plants a lot, and have been kind of working with shows that bring plants into those shows in different ways, and also knowing that all the plants here are sacred to people here, and I want to respect that. And I'm just kind of wondering about what are ways that you all could think of, if there is, to help funnel my efforts. And I think the thing about music is that it catalyzes a lot of, it's a focus and a place where a lot of things can be brought attention to. So I'm just kind of wondering about how I can catalyze that. I've reached out to Kayleen Sisk about doing like a benefit show, and she was open to that. And I'm just kind of wondering about how to go through that kind of thing in a graceful way, and also as someone whose ancestors are from Ireland and Scandinavia, just gracefully like holding music kind of shows on native land, and I think I want to be like cautious of that whole dynamic you spoke about, of like having native speakers at white held events, and yet like I also want to not be exclusive and just have my own voice speaking. So yeah, I don't know if that's too complicated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Galen's your name?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry,
Galen.
my name is Galen. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so that's a great question. What I interpreted that as is like, how can I use my music to support Indigenous communities in an appropriate way?
Yes.
So, I mean, I know it was a little more, complex than that, but kind of the core of it. Does any of the panelists want to give their 2 cents on that? Like, we can all answer that if we want. I think it's a really good question, and it kind of relates to probably a lot of other questions people have, because maybe you're not a musician, but maybe you're a historian, or maybe you're a educator or whatever, and this kind of a question applies to a lot of different, professions and things that we do. So I think it's a great question. So yeah, does anyone want to chime in on that? And no pressure if you don't want to.
I like the idea of, like, if you're performing somewhere on Indigenous land, maybe acknowledging the land that you're on. Like here in Minneapolis is Dakota land. So if you were to do a show here, maybe understanding that history and acknowledging the land that you're on, and maybe using some of your proceeds to benefit some type of cause here on Dakota land. Maybe finding a way to give back to the community that you're directly performing for, or at least in their locale. That's what comes to my mind. Just acknowledging the land, like was stated earlier, and trying to help the people traditionally who reside there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That's great.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, Galen. Thanks for that question. I could see you like ruminating about it, like you really care. So that's awesome. That's like number one, like the first step is like your intention, where your heart is, when you do something like that. There's a cool event over here. It's called Thursday Night Girl Fight in Albuquerque, and basically has a bunch of musicians come together, and they pick organizations, like grassroots organizations within the city, and all the benefits and proceeds go to that organization. Sometimes, those it turns into like this little mini festival for one night. You get a bunch of bands together, and then you also get like the community together. They come, like the people that work at those organizations usually show up. And I felt like that's a really cool way of, it seems like you're first starting to tap into like what grassroots organizations are there. But first of all, like, yeah, what Paul said is like really recognize like the people, that are there, because they're there. The organizers, the native organizers are there, whether it's like one man job, one woman job, 2-man job. I mean, usually sometimes we wear all these different hats, we got to do different things at the same time. But so I guess like, starting there and just, respectfully using, you say you use like medicinal plants in your performances. That sounds kind of interesting.
I think he said plants. He might have said medicinal plants. I think he said plants.
I just said plants. It's a little bit of a longer story, but which I would be happy to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, but go ahead.
Well, plants. Well, brother, like plants are medicinal. I mean, it doesn't even really matter what plant it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do something cool if you respect it in a specific way, and that knowledge is kept by the Anishinaabe and the Lakota people in that area. And so, that's something that you could consider, and maybe even shooting Paul an email. You know what I mean? Just respecting the brother, like about what he does and where he comes from and stuff. That's all.
Thank you so much.
I wonder if Tanea is still on. She might have some interesting perspectives on that.
Oh, yeah, I guess just kind of to echo what everybody else was saying, like it'd be neat to, like, I never heard of that Thursday Night Girl Fights. That's dope, but I have to check it out next time I'm in Albuquerque. But I think that's great. Just like if you can reach out to local Indigenous organizations or people like, hey, I want to do this fundraising concert, and then have them be a part of like the planning if they want to. Maybe like Celestino said, they might wear multiple hats. They might not be able to help plan, but just to like reach out, and if they want, like, think it's great, like want to help work with you fundraising. Like I know in Denver for Cafe Cultura, they would do events, but they would have like different like featured organizations where they would come just talk about their organization for 10 minutes before the performance, and then that way people kind of know where their like funds are going to, and then just like opening it up to like if there's booths there where like local artists could come, like sell their food or sell their jewelry, sell their art. But I think that's a great idea as long as like it's done in the right way, like getting permission and yeah.
Thank you. Also, I don't know if Vicky Blackgoat is on. She was on the last call. She's a Dene woman from Flagstaff. I just want to honor the fact that you're here and that you've been on this training with us. And even though you're technically on the panel or anything, if you're there, feel free to chime in. And then Eric, if you want to say anything after her about like how, if you have any 2 cents on that about how to throw an event in native lands, just from your perspective in a respectful way. But yeah, Vicky, are you here by chance?
Hi, Lyla.
Hello.
It's Vicky. I just wanted to say hi, and yes, I am listening.
So good to see you. Yeah, it's A.
So.
Do you have any ideas about a good way for Galen to, like, something he could do when he brings a music event? For instance, hypothetically, if he brought one into a Flagstaff, like what would you want to see there for it to be, sensitive to the local Native people?
I think, just recognition that there are several tribes that consider this area home and sacred, and probably acknowledging the mountain that we live in the shadow of, and just the languages that are spoken. And if the person acknowledging this area would also mention the peaks by name, the San Francisco peaks, and its native name to several of the groups here, not just the Dene. To us, Dene, it is Doko Osli.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a really good example. Vicky lives in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is, as she said, in the shadow of Doko Osli, which is our western sacred. Thank you, Hillary. Our western sacred mountain. Western. I'm gonna fact check myself. And that peak is incredibly sacred. And Eric was just telling me this morning, our name for the sun is, how do you say it again, Eric? It was Jahona-e.
Yeah, I hope I don't butcher this word, but it's Johanna A.
Mm-hmm. And
Which is
then
for the sun, for the sun at the center of our solar system, but it roughly translates to the one that watches over us during the day.
So just go ahead and speak now.
Mhm.
Oop, you went mute somehow, Eric. Sorry. And then, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to help you with the pronunciation for sun. It's Johanae.
Okay, thank you.
Johanae. Oh.
Nijoneha. Otto, what about moon, Eric? And what does that translate to?
For the moon, it's Klehonae, which that translates to the one that watches over us at night.
So did we get that right, Vicky?
Yeah. That or else you can also call it Olje.
Uh-huh.
Olje.
So yeah, Olje. So that really blew my mind when Eric translated sun and moon for me this morning, because I thought to myself, wow, the sun is a living being that watches over us during the day. And the moon is a living being that watches over us during the night. And so it's like, when you see these sun and the moon, they're no longer dead objects, as in English, right? In English, we see the sun as like, oh, it does photons and it makes photosynthesis, which makes the plants grow. But it's still like a dead object, it's still like, it's not alive. But in our language, it's a father, or maybe, I don't know if it's masculine or feminine or non-gendered, but it's a being that takes care of us. It has affection. It has the ability to love a people. And not only does it have consciousness, but it chooses to use that consciousness to help human beings, like a parent or a grandparent. And so that blew my mind, because I realized just those two words being different from English changes the whole way you look at the world. Because every moment of your life, either the sun or the moon watching over you, and there's something taking care of you. And that changes your whole perspective of life, because all of a sudden you're a child of something greater. So my point in saying all this is, when you do your shows, Galen, it is important to bring the Indigenous perspective, because you might be doing a show, and it sounds like you're in Northern California if you're talking with Colleen, but their word for Mount Shasta is Boyumpoyuk, and that has its own meaning. So doing a show beneath Mount Shasta is different than doing a show beneath Boyumpoyuk, right? It has a whole different worldview, and you have a whole different relationship with what is around you, because you're no longer just doing a show by a mountain. You're doing a show next to a great guardian that has consciousness. And so then your show is not just for the people, it's in conversation with the mountain. So this might seem unimportant, but I think it's very important to consult with local Indigenous peoples, learn whatever they're comfortable sharing with you, so that when you do your shows, you're in the worldview that they've cultivated in that place, so that you're in communication with the sun and the stars and the mountain and the river and everything, so that your show is just another expression of that local ecosystem, and you can see it through Indigenous eyes. That would
Lyla, you've gone mute for some reason.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
If I was doing a show, which I do a lot of shows, for instance, in Miwok territory, Point Reyes, they asked me to do a big show. They said, Lyla, can you do a performance here? I said, well, have we talked with the Miwok people? And they said, no, we never talked with them. I'm like, well, we got to talk with the Miwok people. And I said, I want to do a show, but only if they give me permission only if all the proceeds can go to some sort of thing that they're doing. So they thought about it, and this was good practice for them too, because these are European American folks in Point Reyes, which is a very rich area. All the native people have been driven out by settlers and by the cattle industry. And so they had to put on their thinking caps, like, okay, what Miwok relatives do we know? They reached out to them. There's a Miwok music project. And I think I mentioned on the last training, we raised $1,500 for the Miwok music project, which you never know what that can do. You know, to Tanea's point, she said, if you send one native kid to college, they're one of thousands of kids who are ever going to get a bachelor's degree. That's going to make a huge difference for them and their community. Similarly, if you fund one music program, that could save one native youth from going down the path of drugs and alcohol. Because if they even have one moment where they're safe enough to do Miwok music and connect with their ancestors, I've seen it change a native person's life, where they finally click like, oh wait, this is what I'm here for. I'm not here to do drugs and alcohol. I'm not here to whatever, you know, I'm here to honor my ancestors. So you never know, Galen, you know, what you're gonna do. But all of that, of course, has to be in consultation with the local tribe. So I think it's completely fine to bring Indigenous voices into your show. But what's even better is asking them, how do I create this show? How do you want it to look? And here's my resources that I have. Here's the ideas that I have. Would you like this? And see what they say. Okay, so that took, I'm sorry, I blabbed on a little too long. Maybe one more question. And then Tanea, if you wouldn't mind staying on, I just want to pick your brain about missing and murdered Indigenous women, because that's the action that I would like all of us to take. Excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue, the epidemic that it is, and ways in which we can leverage this group, because I think there's over 100 of us on the call today. There was last training. And if we leverage all of us, you know, to do some kind of action to support the missing and murdered Indigenous women campaign, I think all of us on this call could actually make a tangible difference in the lives of Native people. So before we get into that, let's do one more question, if that's okay.
Lyla, I have a question. Is that okay?
I think so. I don't think anyone else is asking questions, so go right ahead.
So I have kind of recently moved to Portland, so I'm not in Oregon, and so I'm not real familiar with this area, and it's super urban. So I'm like feeling very much like an orphan here. Like I don't know the place, I don't know the land, I don't know the people, the communities, and so in following through with actually something that I was trying to work on before even last class, of trying to figure out who the Native people are that are here and how to connect with them, and ask that question of, you know, in what ways, if at all, can I help? I'm really feeling like a lot of blockage there, like trying to figure out who to reach out to and how. And there's a nonprofit organization here that has a website, and they got the whole thing down, and like, so I could donate to them, but it would be like a relatively impersonal kind of, you know, kind of like a easy way out kind of, oh yeah, I could just click the button and donate money. But in the kind of concept of what would be a more meaningful connection, and how do you find, like, beyond Google searching and beyond this kind of, you know, limited, like, who's got the resources to make a good website, how do you find and connect with the real, like, elders in your community that might still be there, especially in a place like Portland, Oregon, where the tribes were just so decimated and dispersed, and there's not like an active, from what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be like an active, ongoing, focused tribal community right here, although there are a lot of Indigenous people in the city from all different tribes. So I don't know if that's a I felt like that might be relevant to other people too in different places. So I'm just curious if you have some advice on that.
Yeah, and for the panelists, whoever's still on, last training, the homework was to reach out to an Indigenous leader in your community and ask them, you know, in what ways, if at all, can I help? And the purpose of that was to help people practice, you know, actually asking the community how they can help instead of barging in and say, hey, I have a permaculture project, let's do it, you know, which is great, but maybe the community has other priorities, and kind of stepping in line with what the priorities of that Native community is instead of pre-packaging our assistance, but kind of following the lead of local peoples. So then I think Joe has a question that I think a lot of people have, which is like, you know, say you move to a new city and you don't really know where to start and how to reach out. Anyone on the panel, feel free, but if you don't want to, that's fine too. But how would you even begin to start reaching out to, you know, to help in that way, to ask that initial question of, you know, in what ways, if at all, can I help?
Sometimes, I mean, I think Google's helpful. Like I would just Google like Native American resources, Portland, Oregon, or Native American Youth Services, whatever city you're in. I know in Portland, in particular, there's, it's called NAYA, N-A-Y-A Family Center. They've been there for 40 years. They have like lots of different services from community, domestic violence, drug and alcohol support for youth, food pantry, homelessness. They just have so many different things. Like I'm sure they would use volunteers or maybe want food for the food pantry. Yeah, so I would say like, I think Google helps me a lot. Like when I have to, like Lyla, I travel a lot to different communities and I try to reach out to just different local youth when I'm there. And if that like comes to a dead end, like okay, what colleges are in my cities? Portland State, hopefully they have a Native American student center, like, and that's always a good place too, is just if the college has a Native American studies program or if the college has a Native student support program, like that would be a place where you could at least go volunteer time, or at least just, I don't know, go bring, you know, college kids always want food, like go just bring food, like just say you just moved, like you're wanting to learn how you can help if they have resources in the community, because most Native student services organizations, I think, are connected to the community that they live in. So I think that's like a good start, is just going to the colleges.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, actually, I was just gonna say too that that I've never been to Portland either. I actually went for the first time a few months ago and had no idea that there was a Native American center at their university. When I went out there, we went and I went and checked it out and had seen that they had a board posting full of all of the events and everything that's going on to help just the really good information that, you know, people can do to help lend their support and their contributions. And the day that I went there, and I've never been there before, actually, they were already having an event going on. I forget what it was that they were doing, but they had actually they're putting together like a little conference of people in the area that just were asking the same question. Actually, they wanted to figure out how they could contribute and they were just putting all of their minds together and really trying to ask themselves that question. So I think that's a really good resource, actually, is just Native American centers and seeing if there's if they have any postings on ways that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I don't know if still on, Tino, if you have any 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said is, you know, even going back to our brother who wants to do a benefit, is that's, you know, it's a good idea, but it's also a better idea to start off with volunteering. So I didn't realize like what stages people were at on this call, but yeah, if you're in the very beginning stages of trying to figure out how to support local Indigenous communities, is to Google resources, centers, the arts programs, and start to volunteer, because it's not only just an organization, especially if you have an Indigenous philosophy behind an organization, it's a community. And, you're going to learn a lot more from the people than what the organization does. And that's real key, is how to walk in the world as a human being with a light foot, but a heart full of wisdom. And so yeah, just to reiterate what Lyla said, is to really try to support the local organizations that are already doing things, and they've already come to their assessments of what their community needs, and just coming to the table with an open heart and an open mind, and just learning how to plug yourself in where you see that you may help. It's not always monetary, but in some cases, it does come down to that. Even though I have a hole in my roof right now. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like, I don't have a lot of money, but when I have it, I give. And so, and it does help. But that's all I wanted to say, Lyla. Thank you.
Thank you, Tino. Thank you so much. So yeah, all of you guys have offered incredible understandings. And I think Paul had to go, but he did say before he left his email, and he said if anyone wants to work with Native communities in the Twin Cities, to feel free to contact him. So what I would say, Joe, is every one of the panelists on here, and I don't think it's just because they're all my friends, but I think just in general, you're not muted, Tina, by the way. I can hear you chuckle.
Oh, I'm not.
It's okay. It's okay. Every single one of the panelists lives in a spiritual way, or we try to. Oops. Okay, there we go. Because we all, as Native people, we don't, we say like we don't have a religion, we have a way of life. In our community, in Dene culture, the Hogan is not only where we live, sleep, but it's also where we do our ceremonies. So there really is no separation between your house and your church. Like you get up in your church and you go to sleep in your church and you get up in your church. It's a way of life. There is, every breath is a prayer. And for a long time, the anthropologists said, oh, Navajos, they don't have a religion. But they didn't understand we actually were just perpetually in a state of prayer. So there was no separation. So my point is that a lot of people on this call might want to think of it that way, is in what ways can you pray your way into a place of service? I know that prayer might not seem like a logical thing. Like, why would I talk to the sky and then things happen? But it works. And we've tested it for hundreds of thousands of years. Talk to the sky, talk to the sky, tell it what you want to do. Tell it what you're thinking, what's in your heart. And the sky always gives you that and way a lot more than you bargained for. So for instance, like Eric and Tanea were saying, there's these resource centers, right? There's these community centers that you might have, like you said, you didn't think there was any focused efforts in Portland, when actually the Naya has been there for 40 years, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes it's hard to find these things because we're in different cultural silos. But once you reach out and you find those places, what I would recommend is go to an event. Maybe they're having a discussion on youth prisons and people of color going to youth prisons, Native youth going to youth prisons. Maybe they're having a powwow, at the local gym, at the local university or whatever. Maybe they're having a discussion on, you know, God knows what it is. But if it's a public event, then you have permission to go because, I mean, maybe not always, but I'm assuming that they're leaving it open to anyone of all races. So when you go in and you kind of leave it to creator, like, who knows who I'm going to meet today? Who knows what creator might spark today? And it's like an adventure that you don't know how it's going to end, but just go in, you know, feel it out. And then, like I said, once the event is over and winding down, you could say, hey, I just want you to know that I'm really wanting to assist Indigenous communities. Is there a way that I could help? And in what way, if at all? And so I think just taking that leap of faith and going to one of these events and letting creator take it from there and ask the sky to help you, you know, and saying, you know, okay, what, you know, I'm going to this event today, creator, if it's possible, you know, may you please give me a way to assist. And usually that leads to very, very special things. That's how I worked with the Wyndham I went to. As I said, creator, help me write an honors thesis at Stanford that's actually going to help someone. Help me write an honors thesis that's actually going to make a difference in the world. And then boom, me and Colleen just met so beautifully, and I spent the next 2 years with her, you know. So that's how I would meet elders or anyone, is I put the call out and then it comes. So okay, so we are now at 2:24. You guys have all been so gracious. We're almost an hour and a half into the training. This is the second and final training of this, you know, first experiment we're doing. Thank you all for being on the call. I wanted to ask Tanea a question, if that's okay, Tanea, about missing and murdered. And then actually, I wanted to ask Eric a question as well, because he wanted to kind of bring a new element into this conversation that I think a lot of people on this call maybe haven't thought about. But I'm really excited to share that. But Tino, you're welcome to stay on for the rest of the call or not. You're welcome to chime in whenever you need to. But as I said, we wanted to do an action as a team, and maybe keep this group going after this call is over, because we're powerful when we work together. You know, like I said, I think 300 people registered for this course. Not all of them could join it live. Some of you are listening to this after it's been recorded. But we're powerful in numbers, and we have the ability to change the world. So I've been praying very hard for like 3 weeks of like, what could I do with this group? We have so much potential. And what I think I've landed on is this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Some of you may have already heard of this epidemic. Some of you may not, but I was just doing a quick bit of research before our call. And I found that, sorry, let me get the exact statistic. So this is heartbreaking. I'm just going to warn you. But there's this thing, mostly driven by sex trafficking industry, where Native women just disappear. They just disappear. People kidnap them. People beat them. They rape them. If they're lucky, they make it back to the community all beaten up and bruised. A lot of them are found dead. A lot of them aren't found at all. It's a very sad phenomenon going on all over the country. And this is a sad statistic, but this is in the Independent. In the first 6 months of 2018, there were 2,758, sorry, Indigenous women reported missing. So you have, in the first 6 months of last year, you have almost 3,000 Indigenous women reported missing. This is a big deal because, sorry, as Indigenous women, and Two-Spirit too, as Tanea reminds me, Two-spirit meaning non-gender conforming, LGBTQ, has a high rate of this as well. But as Indigenous women, you know, we are pillars of our community. And when the women are taken out, it harms the whole community. So this is 3,000 Indigenous women, but it's affecting many, many, many more, because they take care of so many people. So this is a lot of people. And you have to remember, some of our Native communities don't even have 2,000 people in their population. Like, I think if I'm not mistaken, Tanea, one of your nations, Southern Ute, has a low population of, I think, some thousand. It's not over 10,000. It's so for 3,000 Indigenous women to go missing in the first 6 months of 2018 is a huge, huge number. And sorry. This doesn't just hurt the women, you know, it hurts the men, because for a long time, for a long time, since not only 1492, but even prior to that, when the Norse would come, the Norse came here almost 1,000 years before Columbus. They would take our women from the shores, from like Maine, Nova Scotia, that area. They would take our women. Columbus murdered and disappeared our women. And so this has been going on a long time. So the men of our community are damaged very deeply because they feel like they failed to protect the women. So anyone on this call who's a male, you know, just imagine your sister going missing, your mother going missing, your niece going missing. As a male, it really, really rips you up inside, because you feel like you quote unquote failed to protect, right? So even though it's not your fault, you know, it's the fault of colonization, it's not your fault. But it doesn't just damage the women, it damages the children, and it damages the men, and it has huge ripple effects. And our men right now in Turtle Island, they're going crazy. They're having a really hard time because they feel helpless. Like, and we'll get into the details of why this number is so big. It's a lot of legal, federal, state, tribal law loopholes that allow people to go into these communities and do this. It's really crazy. But our Native men feel really helpless, and they're like, geez, I'm trying so hard to keep this from happening. It keeps happening. And obviously the women who go through it, this story I'm looking at now, the woman was found with no fingernails. Why did they take our fingernails off, beat us, rape us, and kill us? I don't know. I have no idea. But some really raunchy stuff happens to our women that's really hard for people to deal with when they find the body. And again, it's mostly the sex trafficking industry and how vulnerable our women are, and how exoticized and fetishized. So anyways, Tanea, if you have space and time, if you don't, it's totally fine. But if you have space and time, I was wondering if you wanted to just, because I know you do a lot of work with this, if you wanted to just give people an overview of the situation. And Tanea and I were thinking all of us could submit letters to our Congress to develop missing and murdered Indigenous women legislation. So that's going to be our first action, if everyone's okay with that. Yeah, Tanea, if there's anything you want to say about that, feel free, or ideas beyond the letter that we're going to send, or just your understanding of the issue.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing, Lyla, and for everybody for listening. And just a few things to recap. It's a huge issue. It's a huge epidemic, and it's tied to so many different things. Like Lyla talked about, the historical trauma and the things that have happened, and those cycles that continue to perpetuate violence against women, girls, Two-Spirit community, and boys as well. But part of it is also like with the environmental violence, you know, like with pipelines, with the influx of these man camps and strangers to communities, and with a lot, there's not a lot going on. Like there's not a lot of entertainment, I would say, for people on reservations when they come, like an influx of strangers. And so then like drugs are funneled into the communities because there's a lot of money because of the oil, what the oil workers are making. And so there's a rise in like human trafficking around that as well, and women being taken and stolen. And even the numbers that we're hearing, it's not accurate just because there's still such stigma around abuse. There's stigma around reporting, you know, that you've been assaulted, and just also police stigma as well. Like there's a lot of re-education that needs to happen. You know, if people report that somebody's missing, police just often use the stereotype, oh, well, that person's an alcoholic, or she like leaves with men all the time, she'll be back. So they don't often like do the searches, which forces a lot of community to search on their own. As we saw with the Savannah Greywind case in North Fargo, North Dakota, like there was a lot of on the ground people searching, assisting in the police efforts, but a lot of times it falls in the community. And it's tough, you know, because when things happen on reservations, like it has to be federally investigated. And so there's such a backlog of that going on, you know, it takes a long time. So one of the things that's happening now is a lot of, there's being pressure put on states to start gathering data, because that data was not gathered at all before on Native women and how many go missing. Police did not have to report those to the state, so it was impossible to track it. So there's a lot of missing data. A lot of the data out there is just community gathered, like people on the ground doing this kind of work. And so this one sister, her name's Anita Lucchesi, she started the Sovereign Bodies Institute, and they're about data sovereignty, and they're researching a lot. And she travels to communities on her own dime to like help get data on the ground, like from communities visiting to hear about those things. So she's compiled the first database of murdered missing Indigenous women, and so she's slowly like adding to that. But using that information, different states, Washington, New Mexico's working on one, Montana, Nebraska, but people are introducing bills to start gathering data on missing Native women in their states. And so it's good that all that's happening. It's so much momentum. But again, that's where like your help and the help of allies will help, because it's not just us as Indigenous people asking to be counted, and we're such a small constituency, but to have, you know, other people who are also constituents say like, hey, this matters to us too. So that's why I was thinking with Lyla, like it'd be just so powerful just if we could draft templates for you all, and you can add your own flavor to it as well, but to just really pressure our representatives to help push bills, because it would be so amazing if every state could have a bill that forces them to gather data on Native women. Like that information would just be really powerful to be able to help us make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. And that's all I really have to say about that.
Thanks, sis. I know you're a lot more educated on the topic than I am. And I thank you for helping us understand sort of how it's tied to natural resource extraction. And I think too, just how it's tied to the pornography industry, you know, and other things. And I know that pornography is definitely like a just something that everyone does. It's very, very common, and I think it was like 90, some crazy statistic of boys will watch it before they turn 18. It's in the 90s. And so it's just so normalized in our communities. But I don't judge anyone who watches it, and I'm not trying to judge anyone. But just to have a sensitivity of how that industry is applying pressure, you know, to the sex trafficking. It is applying pressure to, it may not directly feed into MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women, but to think about how our pornography consumption does apply pressure to these things and many other things, and think about ways that maybe we can I mean, it's hard because it's an addiction. It's like as addicting as some chemicals, they say. But trying to rethink our relationship to pornography and think about ways that in our own lives we can maybe find substitutes for that, maybe pray about it. And it's really hard. I know some of my brothers and sisters, literally, they can't stop. And so I have no judgment to that whatsoever, but just to rethink it and rethink ways in which maybe, you know, we can start easing off of that and start finding or educating ourselves about how it applies pressure, you know, to women who are and men and to spirit folks, and really trying our best, which it's very hard, but trying our best to reshape our understanding of pornography and really find alternatives, because even though we're not meaning to or we don't have that intention, you never know, it can be putting pressure on a lot of sex trafficking, not just with Indigenous women, but other things as well. So that's something to think about too. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. Tanea and I'm on, to be perfectly honest, I'm not 100% prepared for this call today. I was hoping to be more prepared, but we had a really busy week. But I'm going to start developing a template for this letter that we can each send to our congressional representatives. And like Tanea said, the Native voice, unfortunately, in the political arena isn't as powerful as we would like it to be. It's getting more powerful, as we saw at the last election. But for you all, as you know, European American constituents, to stand beside us, that amplifies our voice tenfold, if not more. And so it really means a lot to us to join us in this Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's campaign, and ways in which we can funnel all of our energy, you know, because like I said, there's over 100 of us on this call right now, I think, to funnel that into the MMIW. I know we can make a difference, especially if that's our prayer. So please look out for a follow-up email from Eleanor and Byron at Wide Awake and myself. Join the Facebook group. We can post things to there. Eleanor can give us a little run through on that at the end of the call if she wants. And let's stick together if we want. Some of you might be busy. You might not be able to hang on with the cohort after this call. That's fine. But if you want to take this call and turn it into a launching point into actually continuing our collective that we formed here, our family that we formed here, and we can start in a respectful way, you know, approaching the MMIW movement, which is very well established. There's experts in it. A lot of them are Indigenous women leading these efforts, and to get behind them and say, how can we help? You know, and that'll also be part of my homework, is not just creating the template, but perhaps reaching out to the sovereign bodies endeavor and asking them, you know, I have this base, this group of people who want to help. How can we help? So if you guys are okay with it, you know, that would be my choice of what we together do together as a collective of action we can do. So Tanea, you're good. If you need to drop off or do anything, you're welcome to, or if you want to stay on for the last 15 minutes, please, or 20 minutes, please go ahead. But the last thing that I wanted to discuss, Eric, if you're still on, is sort of what we as Indigenous peoples, from my perspective, you know, I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples, but from my perspective, the work that we also need to do to forge these alliances. And I think what Eric's about to say will kind of epitomize that and give you a little bit of a window into how, if you're experiencing a hard time forging these alliances, it might not be all your fault. You know, we as Indigenous peoples also have an immense amount of grief, an immense amount of pain to forgive, to come into a place where we're even remotely willing to make alliances. So I wanted to give you guys insight into that, so that if you're frustrated or if you run into walls, you understand that on our quote unquote side as Indigenous peoples, you know, we're also doing our own work to forge these alliances. So Eric, you can go ahead and discuss the thing that we were talking about if you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how thankful and grateful that I am for everybody that's in this class and wanting to build these alliances with the Indigenous communities in the country. I think that's really, really beautiful. We actually have a word for it. It roughly translates to peace and harmony, and that to us is a honjon. And I feel like we haven't been quite reaching for that as well as we should be to reach a honjon. For us to get there, I feel like we have a little bit of work to do on our side as well. I think I think just like you were saying, Lyla, we come from a history that's pretty intense with all of the traumatic events that came with the discovery of this land. So if there is, if any of you, do want to build alliances with these communities, and you are confronted with a little bit of a hard
Could
time.
you possibly hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
Yeah, is that better?
Like maybe like that kind of. It's like because there's so much background noise, it's kind of hard to hear.
Yeah, sorry about that. But if anybody was running into a hard time trying to build these alliances, you will face some difficulty with some people because of the amount of hardships that the Indigenous communities have gone through. But I feel like something that we could do on our end, on the Indigenous people's end, to help build these alliances, is to actually with the power of forgiveness. I feel like with the power of forgiveness, we can actually build more alliances and achieve honjon. And I feel like one way that we could do that actually is to change the word that we have for people that come from European descent. For people that come from European descent, we actually have a word for them, and that's Bilagana. And it comes from the word Bithithagana, which actually means the ones that we're fighting with, the ones that we're always fighting with. And I feel like it's time for us from the Dene community, because it is a Dene word, for us to actually revise that word and to bring a new word that's more honorable. We actually have words for other people, like people that come from Spanish descent. We call them the Nakai Dene. People to the tribes to the north, we call them the Nahokos Dene. So you see that there's always that word included in there, Dene, which means the people, with the exception of people that come from European descent, which is Bilagana, the ones that we're always fighting with. So with my work and with Lyla's help, actually, I was actually wanting to find a way to implement a new word for people that come from European descent. And I want to just to honor them and achieve a healing, so that we can just build better alliances, and I want to get to a place of honjon.
Thank you. Yeah, so as a Dene woman, my whole life I was, you know, told to use this word Bilagana, which means like white person. But oftentimes, not always, but a lot of times when you hear a Dene person say that, it's spoken with a little bit of bitterness or a little bit of anger, or a little bit of almost derogatory sometimes. And I think that we, in some ways, that makes sense a little bit because the system that Europeans brought was so much less efficient than the system we already had. So we as Dene people, we kind of noticed that and we're like, this system is just, it does not make any sense, you know. It's completely hierarchical, it's completely destructive of Mother Earth. It's not, it doesn't compute. And at the same time, to generalize anyone with pale skin, essentially, to call them Bilagana, the ones we fight with, we are kind of inhibiting those alliances, like Eric said. We're inhibiting creating those alliances. And I'll just be honest, in my work, I do a lot of talk about nonviolence. I do a lot of talk about forgiveness. Because as a former drug dealer and drug addict, and just all around kind of a shady person that I used to be, and being sober now for 6 years, but the forgiveness that the ancestors gave me and giving me a second chance at life really affected me and showed me the power of forgiveness. And so I am a believer in second chances. But just to be honest, a lot of times in my community, I don't really see eye to eye with a lot of other Indigenous colleagues, Indigenous contemporaries, and that's completely okay, because I might have some blind spots too. I might be wrong in a lot of areas too, but I do know that, or at least I feel, as Indigenous peoples, we have a job to do too, which is to forgive. And when Eric brought that up the other day of, you know, how can we, you know, maybe we should change that word, Bilagana. I was like, whoa, that is great work, because it does set us apart. It's the first time in Dene language, in the history of Dene people, that we didn't see other people as humans. You know, like he said, there's Nahokos Dene, there's Nakhai Dene, there's always Dene, you know, they're always people, they're human. But except for when the Europeans came, the damage they did to us was so great that we couldn't see it as human, and we lost that ability to connect as humans. And so I think that we also have a task on our end as Indigenous peoples to humanize people with pale skin, and to recognize that we can't blanket statement European Americans either. So when Eric was talking about that the other day, I really wanted to bring that up. I was like, man, can you say that on our call? Because I think that's something that a lot of these folks aren't thinking about, is, you know, because white, you know, quote unquote white people are the bad guys in this story, right? They're the colonizers, they're the slave masters, blah, blah, and they just have all this stuff to atone for, and they have all this bad things they've done. And maybe we lose sight of the fact that Indigenous peoples, although we haven't done anything wrong, we also have a part to play, and we have work to do to even get to the space of wanting to forge alliances. And I have to admit right now, many Indigenous peoples just never will. They'll just never get to that space, and that's okay. Because the trauma runs so deep and the pain runs so deep, they're not ready for that yet, and that's okay. But just to give you guys a little bit of an insight into what we're dealing with in our hearts of really healing ourselves, and healing our letting go of our right to revenge, you know, letting go of that and coming forward with peace again can be very hard, but I think that's something that we're being called to do. So anyways, we have about 7 minutes left. Please look out for an email from us about next steps as a community, as what we can do together to join the MMIW cause. If you want to do a quick Google search of MMIW, you're gonna find a lot of heartbreaking statistics. You're gonna find a lot of really inspiring efforts to remedy the situation. And we're also going to be sending you some materials and some resources to help you out. So thanks to everyone who joined this training. You guys are so beautiful. And I appreciate you coming to this place and supporting the work that each of the panelists are doing, the work that I'm doing. And I know that Eleanor has a few housekeeping details and logistics to talk about. And I'm sorry we didn't get to hear back about your homework. I don't know if folks, and I'm sorry also, Hillary, we didn't get to your question of how can we as European peoples connect with our Indigenous identity. That was one request that you had for this training. Sorry we didn't get to that. But quickly, I would just say prayer. You know, prayer is the way I would get back to my European Indigenous identity. And those ancestors will come and they will bring you such beautiful gifts, and they will leave you breadcrumbs to help lead you to the place you need to be at. So I am interested in people's homework though, like how it went, if you did ask people. So feel free to email me at regenfest2019@gmail.com, and I'll add that in the chat now. But thank you all. I probably won't talk to you like this again unless we do another one of these, but we will be in conversation in the Facebook group via email and via email. So Eleanor, please go ahead and do any final remarks, or Joe, and just thank you everyone for being a part of this, and thanks to all the panelists.
Thanks, Lyla. I wanted to just mention that Facebook group is probably a good place to have that follow-up conversation about last week's homework.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
And then also there was another question that came through the chat a couple of times. People want to know what you want them to do with the document that you shared last time, if it's okay to share it with other people, and kind of what your permissions are around that.
Right. I don't think there's any sensitive material in there. I think you're okay to share it. I'll confirm that once Eleanor is done speaking. I'll just take a look at it. And then for this recording, though, I need to get permission from the panelists if we can share it or put it on YouTube, if that's okay. But we could talk about that later. Okay, go ahead, Eleanor.
Right. And then there's a request for the link to the Facebook page if either you or Eleanor has it.
I'll just take over. Thank you so much. Yeah, the Facebook page, we have not shared a link yet, so we'll get that out to you. Anything else, these questions about, you know, what exactly to do with this document, we'll make sure that's in a mailing. Other outstanding questions like that, we'll look at the chat and be in touch with Lyla. Lyla, I want to thank you so much for what you've put together in this whole training, both pieces. And I want to thank each person that came on as a panelist. Eric, you're in my screen, you're small at the top. Thank you so much for speaking and for what you just shared. And I appreciate you and Lyla for having the conversation that you had. I just want to share a few things that are on my heart and that relate to the work of White Awake and some of the things that have been shared. I feel really tender right now. I feel really like I have tears in my eyes. I was pretty heavy-hearted before we started the training. And it's really, really hard to hear about what's happening to Indigenous women. I think that one of the things that that came with Europeans here was this long, terrible history of patriarchy and misogyny and destruction of women. And so, you know, a lot of what happens when we have these ally interactions and white people are supposed to be all okay and all our needs are met is there's no place to really talk about the trauma that we have. And so I'm just, you know, imagining there's many women on this call who are relating to what was just shared. We don't have that same level of devastation happening in our communities, but our women are not treated the way they should be treated. And so there's a resonance with that pain and a horror at the degree to which that pain is like exponentialized for Indigenous people. And so I want to, you know, just say a few things. I mean, you know, Lyla, actually, I want to thank you that one of the last things you said, you actually drew on European folk tradition in saying that if we pray to our ancestors, you know, they'll leave us breadcrumbs. And of course, that's Hansel and Gretel. And I think that there's a lot of things we don't necessarily value or that have been preserved from older traditions as fairy tales for children, for example. There's a lot there. There's even things there in our hyper-commercialized Halloween and Christmas time. I mean, there is a lot of plastic and overlay and violence and bizarre, you know, consumer culture, but it's not really that far away. Like what you can't, I think part of what I gain from any time I interact with Indigenous peoples is that you cannot ever completely destroy the heart of a people, and we can find our own. A lot of the work that White Awake does really answers to things that have been said in the first training as well as this training. One thing Lyla said for us last time was, you know yourself, know your history, know your story, know who you were before the Romans or other conquerors, before the witch hunts, and don't fall into the trick that you're bad, even as you're looking at racism and colonialism. And then Celestino, you know, you also had similar words to say that we need to know our own history. That is really the work of White Awake. So you guys are all signed up for our mailing list now. Feel free to unsubscribe if you don't want to be, but we offer various online courses and other resources to help people, white people, with these things, understanding who we are, what our history is, and understanding the system within which all of these things were pushed on us and onto other people, which is really economically motivated. And we've started looking more and more at that aspect of capitalism and how the system has played out in the way where it has used different people for economic means. So, you know, we don't claim to be experts at anything, honestly, but just to be holding a space where we can grapple with these things together, look at our history together. And then, you know, one thing that really occurs to me, because I know Lyla, you and Eric are still on the line, and probably maybe some other folks, panelists as well, but I continue to feel that part of what white folks need to step away from self-hatred and shame is to understand our own history. And I think that there's probably a lot of that would be really helpful for Indigenous folks as well. If there's folks who, you know, I know Lyla, you've done a lot of this work yourself, but if there's folks who, you know, don't understand why these terrible people came here and did these terrible things and are curious about that and want to see folks in a different light, I think a lot of you know, this history is not taught. What happened in Europe and what the forces that brought people here is not taught. It's hidden. And so bringing these stories out, if there's ever a way in which the work we do at White Awake could be useful to other folks and in other situations, I would love to work with someone to create, you know, experiences or curriculum or share information that is helping us understand ourselves better with you all. So thank you for giving me a little bit of time. I feel really blessed that we were in a position to make this connection and to bring some resources to Lyla and many of her colleagues through this training. So why don't we switch to gallery view. If there's any final housekeeping notes, I know Lyla, you were maybe gonna say something about that document. We can do that now, but otherwise we'll just wave goodbye. So.
No, I just want to say thank you, Eleanor, for that wrap up. And I think it's very true. The more we know ourselves, the more we can act responsibly in the present moment and act in a way that's healthy for not only others, but for ourselves and for our families and for the earth. So thank you all for taking the time to learn. And I look forward to being in touch with you in the coming weeks. And let's really make some traction in the MMIW movement. And know that although I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples, you know, that I truly offer my hand in friendship and in allyship and camaraderie and in forgiveness. And I forgive you all, forgive all your ancestors, you know, and I say, I don't hold it against you. And I want in this moment to although we may be children of war, I want to become people of peace with you and create some good forward movement. So thank you so much, truly, all of you, for taking the time to take a step in the right direction. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. If you want to unmute yourself, we can hear all those voices that we were keeping silent before, so we could be focused. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to say goodbye or thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you from my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyla.
Thank you so much.
Thank you from Montana.
Thank you, Lyla.
Allah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lyla.
Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day.